Part of my background includes some training in philosophy. And I used to teach for some time an intro to philosophy class. And my students brought up some great points during our class discussions. I really enjoyed hearing how they engaged with the subject. Now, my students were non-traditional, and that's higher ed speak for older. That means that our classes were in the evening, and for the most part, all of the students worked full-time. And getting a degree for them was about getting a tangible or achieving a tangible improvement in their lives. I remember one student, Barbara, who took my Intro to Philosophy class. She ran Barb's Hot Dogs on Main Street. It was a small food cart that sold hot dogs. And she wanted to understand business administration so that she could run her business more efficiently. And every day, she sat next to her cart outside selling hot dogs and canned soda. And on class days, she would come to my class after sitting outside most of the day. For her, it didn't initially make as much sense to take Intro to Philosophy. She knew she wanted to have a better understanding of business administration, and how Intro to Philosophy connected with that. She was initially reluctant to try to see that connection. So it became my task to try to help her see how this fits with a degree in business administration. Each semester, I would start the class talking about the etymology of philosophy. Philo is a Greek word for love, and Sophia is a Greek for wisdom. Pythagoras is likely the first person who used the term philosophy, or love of wisdom, and that was around 5 centuries before the time of Christ. But what I could do for Barbara and other students in that class is help them see how philosophy asks the big questions. Why are we here? How do we know what we know? And for today, and for our passage this morning, maybe an important question could be, where are we going? How could I ask Barbara, where do you think the world is going after she'd been sitting in the sun all day? So the challenge for me was to connect it to life. It's the same with big questions for us. They have to connect to our lives. They have to speak to where we are and what we're doing. It'd be easy to give a Sunday school answer when we're confronted with one of these big questions. For example, the future is God's. And someday the world will end. Done. Next question. Move on. What if there's more to it than that? In my class, Barbara said, I guess I'll work until I can't work any longer. And then I'll die. Even in mainline churches, there's the comforting method of ducking big questions about the future. We can cite Jesus' admonition to avoid predicting the time or the place the world would come to an end. Yet, there's this assurance implicit in Jesus' answer in the Gospels that the world will come to an end someday. So where are we going still looms. Hegel is one of the great names in philosophy, and in Hegel's philosophy, he developed the idea that history makes sense. And that if we're going to talk about where we're going, we look back and we can see in this philosophy of history that history's moving towards something. He suggested that we're moving toward a realization of human freedom. He wrote, the question at issue is therefore the ultimate end of humanity, the end which the Spirit sets itself in the world. To have the Spirit set itself in the world would be great right now, at this moment. As the news continues to confront our sense of what can be right or wrong, thinking about the future is strange. 2020 seems to be the year of don't ask if things could get any worse. There are jokes and memes about aliens and asteroids, both in outer space, looking on the planet saying, I don't know, you go first. No, you go first. Even earlier this week, as I was thinking about this morning, I wondered what would happen. I mean, going back to last Tuesday, I remember thinking ahead to this morning, thinking, what will happen between now and then? I'm so eternally grateful that nothing horrific happened, that I had to begin rewriting what I was going to say. I was even double checking the news this morning to make sure I didn't miss something awful. And it's strange to say that nothing terrible happened when the number of deaths from COVID-19 is nearly 120,000 in the U.S. and protests continue around the country. Yet, no new horrors grabbed the headlines. In our faith, we focus significant amounts of our attention on God's grace. When we think about the world, we keep going back to God's love for us, forgiveness, mercy. We sing about it, we ask for it in prayer, and we celebrate it. Paul traces God's outpouring of grace through Jesus Christ and reaches a crescendo when he asks the rhetorical question, so what do we do in response to God's grace? Do we keep on sinning so that God can just go on forgiving? That's like spilling some milk on the floor. And after the milk is on the floor, you get a piece of wet paper towel or some paper towel, you mop it up and wet the paper towel to make sure you get the milk. And then you look at it and you realize the floor could use a really good scrub right now. So out comes the mop and the bucket, and the floor begins to take on a new hue, and it sparkles. And after the floor sparkles, we don't look back and say, thank goodness I spilled that milk. I've got it. I'm going to dump a whole glass. No, better yet, if the floor looks this good after just a little spilled milk, why don't I dump the whole gallon? No. Grace is God's response to our imperfections, not a way we've used our imperfections to manipulate God. And when we ask where we're going, we look to God's future. It's a future full of grace and opportunity. Hegel may not have been thinking about Barb's hot dogs when he wrote about the spirit in the world and human freedom. When Barb knows there's something beyond putting a dog in a bun, and that she has a role, then God's grace pours down. When she can associate thinking philosophically, thinking deeper about the questions, relating what's been to what will be, and looking at the future with hope, she has more tools to engage with the world. She has greater agency then and freedom in her own role. And to me, that's grace. That's the unmerited divine engagement that brings a human life into communion with God. Should she go back into the darkness, sort of untake Intro to Philosophy, so she can stop thinking about these big questions, so that she can stop learning these ancient Greek names and German and other philosophical names, so that she can stop thinking about the world in that critical way? No. Truthfully, once she's experienced that kind of freedom and knowledge, she can't go back. That's just like us. Once we've experienced the light of God's grace, we cannot go back to the darkness of sin and isolation. In 1989, Francis Fukuyama suggested that the end of the Cold War marked the ascendancy of Western liberal democracies and the end of history. That was a bold assertion by Fukuyama in '89. But I mean, thinking back to the end of the Cold War, I get it. I can see where he was coming from. It seemed like we won. The West won. There wouldn't be problems anymore. Sort of Jesus didn't have to free the captives because I guess Western liberal democracies had figured it out. Despite Fukuyama's bold assertion, history continues, and it appears closer to a progression than sort of an end, the way he described it. The Russian philosopher Nicholas Berdyaev in the early 20th century said history is a progression. It possesses an inner significance and mystery, a point of departure and a goal, a center and a purpose. It both ends and begins with the fact of Christ's revelation. Where are we going right now? I don't know exactly. But I don't have to know. That's part of that grace we read about in Romans and throughout the New Testament. Each day is a choice. We can choose death or life. We can choose sin or righteousness, slavery or freedom. We can choose to live in the old ways, or we can follow the light of Christ into something new, something bright, and even something divine. That's where God's leading. Once we've seen the light of Christ, we can't go back to the darkness. There's more involved in living for Christ than personal salvation or something just for me. It's a radical change in our identity, and it should make us uncomfortable. When I limit myself to academic theology or philosophy, it's easier because an academic pursuit doesn't require personal transformation or engagement. The interesting student experience for my students when I used to teach always came when they could see how the subject could change the way they approach their situation, their life, their days. We need that today. None of the questions we face are easy. But if we dedicate ourselves to living for Christ, we can find peace in the discomfort of transformation. And even though we live and act in a way that goes beyond our nature, we can experience fulfillment. This isn't a way of earning a relationship with God. It's leaning into life in Christ. It's recognizing the grace Jesus showers on us, and by acknowledging it, experience transformation. And once we've seen Jesus, can we go back to blindness? No. No way. I don't know where my old student Barbara is right now. I don't know how she's dealing with the pandemic, the recession, or the protests. From my student, though, I learned that philosophy, theology, and even life in Christ has to mean something. It has to connect with where we are. Juan Luis Segundo once said, "I can no longer carry the burden of a philosophy that leaves me alone at dinner time or prayer time." And neither can I. Living for Jesus doesn't leave us alone. Living for Jesus goes with us each day. And no matter what we face, we don't face it alone. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on. Jesus and the entire communion of saints is with us. Amen.